All right. So, panel, the advent of the present dispensation is one where we all agree to silence what we believe is in our respective states for the greater good. We all agree to submit our sovereignty to international organizations because we know that without their checks, we cannot coexist as a peaceful world. If we can show you that on our side of the house, submission of your sovereignty favors you more and favors the world more, we are very proud to be proposition in this case. To the extent that it even disfavors you but favors the world, we are also very proud. Four things basically in my speech. After talking about our case, I'm going to talk more on legitimacy. Then I'll talk on if we have a case of perverse incentives on both sides, why the checks and balances on our sides affords us more the opportunity to do this. Then I'm going to talk about why we need to control narratives and perspective as to what we tag extremists, especially in the 21st century, and I will respond to them. Four things in direct refutation. First, Bukky tells us that states cannot combat terrorism effectively because we want to put a strain on how they respond to local things. So first of all, we say the motion says the United Nations is the international organization should have the exclusive right to track groups. It doesn't mean that we are going to exclude states in the eradication or extermination process, whatever. But then their principal argument on legitimacy is that states all have the right of self-determination. Our response to this in a preemptive, when we tell you that the principle of self-determination and sovereignty in itself, especially in the present dispensation, stems from the fact that we all submit to international organizations. The reason why a country cannot just wake up one day now and colonize another country is because international organizations and how we submit our rights to are frowned upon these things, to the extent that your self-determination affects the whole world as a whole and affects people which the world care about as a whole. We are very, very legitimate to come in and stop you as the state. Then they talk about proximity and how when we talk about how because states are closer to people and that affects their decision. I'm going to tell you how that backfires on them when I talk about perverse incentives and how we garner much more resources when we use international organizations. And then these guys say we should allow states determine their levels of extremism. The problem with that was recognized in our states when we talk about the perverse incentives of international organization. Why is the perverse argument important? Because if we have states who do not have perverse incentives on their side of the house, the logical thing is that they will be willing to submit to international scrutiny. But in most instances, perverse incentives exist on states who do not want to do this. Especially states like Russia, especially states who want to oppress people. Then they say, let's allow the states decide because people are now critical of government. Two sort of responses to this. We say dictatorial regimes silence opposition. In most instances, regimes that are very, very oppressive do not allow for critics and any other opposition. But more importantly, we say even if majority of the countries buy into this, if majority of the country says we buy into slavery, the international world does not allow that just because the state has the right to self-determination. But then, first thing on legitimacy, I'm going to add one more here. Our says, see, is sovereignty the most important consideration in today's debate? No. Two sort of responses. We say the protection of sovereignty in itself stems from the coalescing of nation states into bigger organizations that can combat extremist views in the world. But more importantly, we say if your sovereignty and the protection of it threatens the preservation of the world and how this affects the world, we are very legitimate in carrying that out. Now, let's talk about the characterization of tagging people as extremists and how it affects the world. Why should we now come in if we establish that we have legitimacy? First, we say extremism requires the most extreme forms of reaction, to the extent that when a state says this particular group of people are extreme in society, they react in a very, 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 very aggressive manner. We have to control what kind of aggressiveness a state can use, right? So secondly, we say the organizations which have international memberships across larger communities makes it so that when you say you want to tag a group like Jehovah's Witness as an extremist group, what you are saying is that you reject all other members of the world. What you are saying is that in essence all the Jehovah's Witnesses around the world are extremists. But then we also talk about how we also talk about how, like, in terms of the characterization, we talk about how when government responds, like when government place like restrictions without proper scrutiny on what a group can exist in society, we have a society whereby what the international organizations try to protect is eroded in the long run. Closing.
All right, Tayo, do you believe that there exist measures that can be taken against the state when there is a tagging which is perceived to be globally wrong?
Yeah, but then you are considering our case. If that's it, because if we have the exclusive right to tag members, if you tag someone wrongly, then the exclusive right says we say you are wrong, right? So that is a government case if you don't know. But then more importantly, on perverse incentives, three things our says dictatorial regimes clamps down on helpless organizations. As international organizations, we have like that. We have the obligation to help these guys. And then we talk about how. See, when you put too much power in the hands of the state in this instance, you remove perspectives that are very, very important. And this is my like second substantive as DPM. First, we say, why do we need to control narratives as what requires extremism measures in the present in the present dispensation? We say the reason why the United Nations or EU or international organizations have membership that spans across a lot of nations is that we can bring a lot of perspectives to the table. To the extent that we don't get that on their side, what they do is to put themselves in echo chambers that do not allow for discussions. We say that is wrong. First, if they say that the argument is there's perverse incentives on our side of the house, we say the kind of checks and balances that exist in the international world is much more than what exists in those dictatorial regimes, or even if their nation states are the best of ideal, we have more checks and balances. So we tell you that in these instances, our world is better when you can allow, a lot of nations, contribute to the discussion of what we tag extremist groups. More importantly, we tell you that extremism affects the whole world. So if you're an extremist, you need to propagate, you need to expand. All of these things will affect the sovereignty of other nations. We cannot allow nation states control what we tag extremists. That is why we cannot allow Israel to go away by tagging Hamas as extremists, because we think they are going to react in an extreme version that the world does not like. This is going to spiral down into a world where we do not always like. Please vote government.